Hi and welcome to Ryvis Rambles, where I talk about whatever the fuck I want. And today I want to talk about how I taught myself Japanese. Since I had or still have a blast learning Japanese, I wanted to talk to you about how I learned it. What worked for me and what difficulties I had. I'm gonna answer the why, when and how and offer a few tips at the end. So if you don't want to listen to my truly heartwarming and inspirational backstory, go ahead and jump right to the tips. Bit heartless, but you do you. Hi, quick intermission. First of all, as you can see, I fucked up the green screen situation, so sorry about that. And secondly, I'm gonna pull up me practicing kanji to the side, so it's not just me talking to the camera, because I don't really have any other b-roll. The app I'm using is Anki, by the way, but I think I'm going to mention it again later in the video. Let me start with a little story time. I'd always had an obsession with the Japanese language, which was highly influenced by, not gonna lie, my anime consumption. The moment I learned I could watch the episodes online on demand with subtitles, it was over. But since I have issues focusing, I wanted to be able to watch anime without having to look at the screen the entire time. Another of my main motivators was that I initially wanted to work as a translator of media like movies, books, and games. And I thought, especially in the game industry, it would be quite beneficial to know Japanese. However, that didn't quite work out. At least in the country I live in, being able to speak multiple languages isn't enough to qualify as a translator. But nevertheless, young me didn't know all that. So I started to learn Japanese when I was a teenager. However, the class was on a Saturday morning, and as a teen, I had better stuff to do on a Saturday morning. For example, catching up on all that sleep I lost during the week. And when I went to class, I also couldn't focus there. At some point, I started skipping until I finally decided to quit. I don't remember how long it lasted. Maybe a few months, a year tops. And there was a short period in my life where I stopped watching anime entirely because I still couldn't focus on reading the subtitles. But a few years back, around 2016, I was still yearning to learn Japanese. Because apart from watching anime without subtitles, I just think it's neat to be able to understand and communicate in a different language, especially when you travel to another country. This notion was amplified when I was working at an international school where we had a few Japanese kids who didn't speak English very well. One day on my way home, I was thinking to myself, I really wish I could speak Japanese. I really wish I could learn Japanese. And after some consideration, I came to the conclusion, what's stopping me? I mean, of course, the point of the school was for the kids to learn English, but my goal was to be able to communicate with them in situations of distress, when they were hurt, for example, be it emotional or physical. Unfortunately, I didn't quite get there, because I left my job at the school a year after I started learning Japanese. I did befriend a Japanese mom though. Hi, Sumiko! When I tell people I learned Japanese, the question mostly isn't why, but how? Followed by a very baffled why. As I mentioned earlier, I'm only going to talk about what worked for me and Japanese. It might not work for everyone and every language. Just putting it out there as a small disclaimer. Anyway, to answer the question of how, I think I have to talk about the three main factors: motivation, dedication, and ambition. First, you need to determine your motivation by answering the question why you want to learn that language. I answered that question for me in the section before. Then we have dedication and ambition, which basically goes hand in hand with dedication with a dash of discipline. I'm sorry to break it to you, but putting a book under your pillow won't help. To really learn Japanese, I think you need to dedicate at least an hour a day to studying. I personally studied up to 8 hours a day for a whole year. And that only was enough for some grammar and other basics. On a bad day, investing 10 minutes into vocab or kanji practice should be fine too, but it shouldn't become a habit. I mean, studying 10 minutes is a good habit. I mean, 10 minutes instead of an hour shouldn't become a habit. But I also believe once you start and get into the flow, you don't want to stop, even after an hour. At least that's how it was for me. If you don't want to go by time, you could also go by chapter of textbooks or a certain number, 20, 50 or 100 of kanji or vocabs a day. Now, how did I do that? After I decided to pick it up again, I decided against visiting a class. Not only because I was a broke-ass bitch, but also because I hate commitment and like to learn at my own pace without being bound to a certain time on a certain day. Also, if I only practice or study weekly, I am prone to forget what I've learned the week before. That's why I started to teach myself, with the help of YouTube and textbooks. I'll try to link all the material, websites, and YouTube channels I used in the description below. So, I picked up some Japanese textbooks, and since I can only work at 0 or 100, I studied Japanese for practically 8 hours each day. I went through multiple textbooks, but the one that I can recommend because it worked best for me is Genki. I first focused on learning the alphabets, hiragana and katakana. And then I disciplined myself to only write in Japanese when I answered the textbook questions. While I learned grammar with the textbooks, I got the Anki app to learn kanji. So whenever I had the opportunity, I would also use the kanji I learned right away when answering the textbook questions. I knew I had to use it, even if it was difficult at first if I wanted it to stick. And it worked. While I don't know how to read all of the kanji, I'm still able to identify the meaning of most of the 2000 main ones. It really helps while reading. If you know the meaning of the kanjis, you can kind of suss out what the text is about without being able to actually read it. Once I was done with the textbook grammar and had a goodish foundation, I of course needed to practice. So I started watching anime again. And now I'm back in anime hell. But I love it. I missed it. That was good enough to learn my listening skills. And I bought Japanese books and mangas to practice my reading skills, but I still needed to practice my speaking skills, so I started visiting class again. I signed up for the beginner's class. Imposter syndrome says hello, and I'm not trying to brag, but it was way too easy for obvious reasons. One of my classmates even asked me, "What are you doing here?" And damn, if that doesn't make you feel welcome, I don't know what does. A few days later, however, I also got an email from my teacher asking me if I wanted to visit a higher level class, and I was like, well, if my teacher says so, why shouldn't I? So I did. I skipped 6 courses. I went from class 1 to class 7, and 1 class equals 1 semester. And it was still a bit easy, but I didn't feel too out of place anymore. I was a tiny bit ahead maybe. But my teacher again asked, "Do you want to visit a higher level class?" And I was like, heck yeah, let's do it. And I skipped another 8 classes. So I went from 1 to 15 within less than a year. I was highly intimidated and scared that people would call me out for being a fraud, but I felt like we were all at about the same level, with different strengths and weaknesses. It felt right, but also still like something was lacking. I don't remember what it was and would have continued, but then a friend of mine who was also studying Japanese at that time asked me if we wanted to do it together. And I was like, hell yeah, I hate being alone. I didn't make friends in the other classes. Let's do it! So I switched schools. I was invited to an interview because I signed up for the higher class my friend was in, and I guess they had to test whether my skills were sufficient enough, if I could keep up with stuff. And I passed. My friend has stopped in the meantime, but I'm still visiting that Japanese course, and I have to say it certainly helps. Even though I am now only practicing Japanese once a week, basically what I feared before, the class helps me keep my skills from getting rusty and boost my confidence. My main difficulties were the kanjis with their different meanings, studying vocabulary, and keigo, the super polite and respectful speech. There are different ways how kanji can be read. Generally speaking, there are 2 readings, the onyomi and the kunyomi, but it's rarely limited to only 2 readings. It mostly depends on the context and in which combination the kanji is used. Let's take, for example, this character. Here are just a few ways it can be read, out of 12 or 13 I think. First we have sensei, which means teacher. Then we have umareru, which means be born. Then we have ikiru, which means to live. Then we have nama, which means raw, as in nama tamago, raw egg, and so on. My challenge with vocabulary is that if I don't learn the words within a certain context, they just won't stick. It worked with kanji somehow, but it doesn't work with vocabs. And don't get me started on keigo. It's so hard and complicated, and my brain just refuses to memorize it on top of an already hard and complicated language. You basically take a simple word and make it long to be more respectful. For example, to eat, taberu becomes meshi agaru. And I can only remember this one because it has meshi in it, which can mean meal, but I don't even know if it actually means meal or if it's just a homonym. So yeah, those are the 3 things I'm still struggling with, and totally the only reason why I'm not fluent yet. Why the fuck you lying? Anyways, here are my most important tips in a nutshell. Hiragana and katakana. Learn it and use it. While the Japanese language naturally doesn't only consist of hiragana, when you start using it diligently, it will become second nature to you in no time. Speaking from my experience, I can read hiragana as easily as the Roman alphabet? Is it Roman? English words, okay? Katakana is also quite easy to learn, but not used as frequently, mainly for loan words or animals, for example. Since katakana isn't as common as hiragana, I sometimes have trouble reading it, but I think that's fine. Kanji, same spiel here. It may appear overwhelming at first, but if you learn it step by step, for example 10 minutes a day, and use the ones you learned right away whenever possible, they will slowly burn into your memory. I do have to admit though, since I use my computer to write in Japanese, I sometimes cannot fully remember all the strokes. I could definitely work on that. And I was a lot better a few years ago when I still practiced daily. Back then, I learned 100 kanjis a day, which took me about an hour. And once I had officially learned all of the 2000 something basic ones, my app only had me repeat maybe 20 a day, which then only took me around 10 to 20 minutes. Grammar. Textbooks definitely helped me build a good foundation, but that foundation will quickly disappear if that grammar isn't used. So same here. Once you learn new grammar, try and implement it right away. Use it whenever possible. However, if there's certain grammar you don't understand 100%, I'd say don't get too hung up on it. Most of the time you can get your point across even if your grammar isn't perfect. In the end, it really depends on what you want to achieve by learning a new language. Vocabulary. If you, like me, have trouble remembering vocabulary, then my tip is when you try to say something and a certain word is missing, then make a note of that word, look it up and learn it with context. Let's say you don't know the word for cat. Look it up and write 10 or so sentences that contain the word cat. Then it should stick, hopefully. Practice and repetition. As mentioned before, once you learn a new word or grammar, use it. If you have no one to talk to, try to think in the new language. No matter how simple it is, be it asking yourself what time it is or appreciating the nice weather. If you don't use what you've learned, your brain will discard it, unless you have an eidetic memory, but then you probably wouldn't be watching this video. Tandem partner. If you can't afford to travel or go to class, there are different ways to find someone to practice your language with. I joined groups with Japanese people who wanted to learn English and in turn would help me with my Japanese. We would meet up and speak 1 hour in English and 1 hour in Japanese. Or you can make friends, be it online or in person, who speak this language on a native level. Of course, you shouldn't just befriend them to practice Japanese, or at least communicate your intentions openly. I, for example, made 2 friends online who actually prefer to speak in Japanese, which is good for me, but also exhausting sometimes, simply because it takes me so much longer to answer. But yeah, the bottom line is there are more than enough options even for broke-ass people like me. All of what I said obviously is just how it worked for me. I feel like I can't say this often enough. What's more important is your intrinsic motivation. In the end, all you can do is fuck around and find out, trying to figure out what works best for you, be it by yourself, in a class, or with a private teacher. The options are endless and it's not impossible. Maybe you can even use learning patterns or habits from your past that worked for you during your school time or something like that. In conclusion, of course you can only get so far on your own. Especially if your goal is to sound as natural as possible, you will need help of a native speaker, be it a teacher or a friend or whoever is there to help you. As for me, I'm still learning. Even after almost 8 years, I'm still not fluent. But that's because I stopped studying 8 hours a day. If I were still as diligent as before, I'd probably be much better by now. How about you? Do you want to learn Japanese or another language? Or are you already studying? What learning methods worked best for you? Let me know in the comments. If listening to random people talking about random stuff on the internet appeals to you, leave a like and subscribe. And if you have any topics you'd like to hear me ramble about, leave a suggestion in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye bye!